Hi, good evening. Welcome to today's lecture on governance, healthcare, and financial lever. We'll be talking about different governance models in healthcare and the financial levers. We'll have two case studies, a US case study and an India case study. Here is a comprehensive chart based on a lot of analysis that we have done. We have studied different countries, models, how they work across Canada, Taiwan, Korea, Sweden, and many other countries. So if you look at Canada, Taiwan, South Korea, they all are a single pair. So from a payment system perspective, they have a single pair. Government is the pair, right? And from a provider perspective, the government buys the services from the providers. So the providers are not government, are not 100% government. Some of them have government component, and the government does play a role, but mostly the single pair is buying the services from the providers, and that's one model where that we studied. So the objective of the study has been basically to figure out that digital health transformations has happened in all these countries. How has it happened? What have been levers of change, and what are the major factors that have sort of supported and contributed towards it? So there are two things that we found. One is that a financial lever has been used in pretty much all of these countries to bring about a digital health transformation. And the second one has been that there has been a unique health ID. So every country had a unique health ID that was sort of used to bring the entire country towards digital health transformation. So, but then every country's healthcare system is different. In spite of the differences, these are common things that we have observed. So Canada, Taiwan, and South Korea, they are a single pair. Then Sweden, Scandinavian countries, and UK is having a beverage model. Beverage was a economist, a famous economist, who came out with this model, where government owns the payer side as well as the provider side. So government owns both sides, and government runs the entire healthcare system. So that is a model. There also, the digital health transformation has happened in a very big way. And the two common things that we observed here also is that there is a single sort of a UHID, and then there is a financial lever that has been used. So financial lever plays a vital role. Now, the next set is Australia, Spain, and USA is slightly different. We'll deal with it separately, although that's also a hybrid model. In a hybrid model, there is private sector, government, and other models of payment that are there. Like in Australia, if you look at it, 67% is public, and then 15% is private, and then about 15% is out of pocket. So these are the kind of model that exists in Australia. And then even the provider side, it's a hybrid model. Spain also, it's a hybrid model. US is slightly different. In US, private sector plays a much larger role. You see that the percentage of the private sector is more than 50%. 50 or more than 50, and Medicare plays about 28 to 30%. So Medicare, Medicaid, government. So government sort of is covering about 28%. So it's largely private, and the provider side is largely private, privately owned, privately run. Payer side is sort of mixed. US went through a whole transformation on the digital health side. They brought in a lot of policy changes to make it happen. This happened mostly under the Obama regime, and we will talk a little bit more about it. So we have a proper case study on it. So the transformation was started in 2009, 2008, 2009, and it went through until 2014. But after that, it was cut short with the change in the administration. When the Trump administration came in, they sort of stymied that and took a different direction. Hopefully now with the Biden administration coming in, many of these things will get carried forward. But in any case, it's a case study that we can look at, and it did result into a moderate transformation, and it resulted into a moderate transformation because a truly national UHID was not there. In the US, there were lots of privacy concerns about unique health ID, that I cannot sort of reveal all my details to the government, to everybody. Those sort of concerns are not there in Canada. They're not there in UK. The government knows everything. But in US, they hold back the information. People have privacy concerns, and they do not want to sort of reveal everything. So a unique health ID across the country could not be established, and that was a vital point because of which they were not able to do a full transformation, and that sort of came in the way of a lot of digital health transformation that they wanted to do. So there's a learning there. Clearly, there's a learning there. So we should sort of follow the model where the full transformations have happened in the digital health transformations, like the government-funded, government-run programs in UK, in Canada, South Korea. Those are very good models to sort of emulate, but be careful about the things that have happened in the US. Next slide. So we'll get into the case study, the US case study. So if you look at the pie chart here, now on the pie chart, as we were talking in the previous slide, that about 48 to 50% of the health insurance is employer sponsored. So that's all private employers or employer sponsored health insurance. So that's a mature model in the US, right? And then you have about 28 to 30% coverage coming from Medicare, Medicaid, and military. So that is about 30% of coverage. That leaves aside a small chunk, which is about 15% of the population is uninsured. Now, this uninsured population is the one which actually is, sort of outside the health insurance bracket, and it causes a lot of problems for the health insurance system, the entire healthcare system, because this is what Obama administration said. They said, when these people fall ill and they have to sort of take treatment, they land up in the emergency department, and then they seek care from there. So government has to pick up that cost. And then based on that logic, the Affordable Care Act was brought in. And under the Affordable Care Act, it forced the uninsured people to have health insurance, some sort of health insurance. Either you take your own health insurance or your employer gives you health insurance. So about 30 million people were expected to come into the health insurance fold. So that has already happened. Government, US has seen that change coming in because of a Affordable Care Act. Next slide. Next slide. Yeah, thank you. So this is the disease burden. Now, why does a health insurer or any payer pay for the healthcare coverage? It pays for healthcare coverage so that they want the total disease burden to come down. So when the total disease burden comes down, the productivity goes up. I mean, it's expected that the productivity will go up. That is the reason any provider pays for health insurance. So that is a interesting thing that that happens. That there is no direct correlation between why a payer actually pays for all the health insurance coverage and the healthcare coverage. So, but then this is the way to calculate that, based on the total disease burden, how much is the disease burden coming down, or is it sort of, at least you're able to delay the disease progression. You're able to reduce the hospitalization and things like that. So those are the measures that you use to figure out as to how the health insurance model or the healthcare coverage is doing. Next slide. These are the changes. A lot of policy changes happened in the US. So Affordable Care Act was an act that was brought in. I just mentioned that in March 2010. So under this, it was designed to extend the health insurance coverage to the millions of uninsured Americans. The act expanded Medicaid eligibility and created a health insurance marketplace. The entire, 30 million people are a lot of people. So if they have to be insured, they have to be brought into the health insurance coverage. So it's a huge market that opened up for the health insurance. So the health insurance exchanges were created, and a whole lot of new models came up to bring them into the health insurance coverage. So that's the Affordable Care Act that happened in 2010. We'll link it to a couple of other changes that happened. Next slide. So there was a ARA Act that happened. So this was the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. So in 2008, when the Lehman Brothers crashed and the economy went into a tailspin, the US government put in, about $787 billion into the market. And to do that, they had to bring in a new act called the ARA Act. And with the ARA Act, they also put in a lot of money into healthcare. And they didn't want to put in money just like that. They wanted to sort of use that opportunity to bring in reforms. And they wanted to sort of restructure the way healthcare is sort of operating in the US. And they also, use digital as a tool for doing that. So they said, all the money that goes into healthcare will be linked to incentives, and the incentives will be linked to digital. So I'll talk a little bit about it, how they linked it to digital. Next slide. HIPAA was already existing. It was an old law passed in 1996. But then under the ARA Act, to give the money, a new act was brought in called HITECH Act. And the HITECH Act strengthened HIPAA further. HIPAA was Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. So it strengthened the HIPAA Act further and took it to one more step level where it was able to talk a lot about how the digital will be used. So you need to understand a little bit more about HIPAA before you understand HITECH Act, because HIPAA was an act which said a lot of things. But there are about 5 things that were very important and sort of a milestone or a path breaker in that sense, in that it had said in the past, and a lot of changes happened because of it. So HIPAA had said that there should be unique IDs for the doctors, for the facilities, for the beneficiaries. All the unique IDs should be there. Then there should be registries. So there should be registries for all these unique IDs. So across the country there needs to be registries. And then transactions and code sets. So all the transactions need to be standardized. So all the formats for the transaction. So if the patient is going from a primary to a secondary to a tertiary, or if the transaction is being done between a provider and a payer, so there needs to be a standardization of the transaction. So the form needs to be standardized. It should be electronic form, electronic readable form. And the code sets were, for diagnosis, you should have ICD-10. For procedures, you should have CPT and things like that. So all the code sets, US defined their own code sets. They said, they did take a lot from WHO, which were open source, but then they modified it for their own use. And they had their own proprietary code sets that they said, you should be using. So that's the third thing. The fourth thing that HIPAA said was privacy. So US people, they're very particular about privacy, my data, privacy. Only I should be able to see, only my doctor should be able to see, nobody else should be able to see my data, and things like that. So privacy concerns. So HIPAA talked a lot about privacy, that the only the people who need to see the data should be able to see the data, nobody else. And then data security, in terms of data security, network security, physical security, so that data remains secure, and there is no hacking of the data. Healthcare data is usually kept at a very high level of security in the US and many other countries. In India, that paradigm hasn't happened. We'll talk about India as a case study as we go forward. But I thought I should tell you what has happened in another country, which you hear a lot about, even though that's not the best case study. But then, what went right and what went wrong. So what went right was HIPAA definitely went right, because it told you what to do, how to do. HITECH Act went right. It took HIPAA one step forward. It said, implement HIPAA into the world. Let the transactions and code sets standardization be built into the electronic medical records. There were incentives that were put into the hands of the doctors. So we'll talk about the incentives in subsequent slides. Go ahead. Next slide. This is a little more about HITECH Act. Just the references are being given, some dates, and if you want to read up more, you can go and look it up. So just for reference purposes, we have given some little details on the HITECH Act. Next slide. Yeah, so this is the crux of the matter as far as the HITECH Act is concerned. So I gave you a lot of policy changes that happened just to make this happen. This is basically the meaningful use. It's called meaningful use. Stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3. It started in 2011. It was supposed to go till 2021, but it was cut short in 2014-15 because of the change in the administration. What was it supposed to do? So in stage 1, it was supposed to sort of bring in electronic capture of healthcare information in standardized format. So what it said was that doctors' clinics should have EMR, and they incentivize the doctor's clinic for having the EMR. So any doctor's clinic or any hospital that had an EMR, they were incentivized by tax incentives. So you could claim tax incentive just by putting an EMR in your clinic or a hospital. So that was the stage 1, just the show of hand that I'm willing to be part of the program. I'm putting the EMR there. I'm going to sort of capture the data electronically. That much was enough to claim the credits. In stage 2, it was supposed to be that you use the EMR. So increased requirements for e-prescription and incorporating lab results. So lab results and e-prescribing, that should become electronic in stage 2, and electronic transmission of patient care summaries across multiple settings. So across the ecosystem, you should be able to send the patient care summaries between different healthcare settings, from primary to secondary to tertiary, and things like that. So that is what was the stage 2. So you had to use the system and show. Only then you could claim the tax incentive credits in stage 2. In stage 3, it was supposed to be a health information exchange, that proper health information exchange comes into focus. It comes into existence. Data from various different sources comes together and is exchanged across different systems. So that happens in stage 3. And then you in the health information exchange, what happens is you get the data in standardized format. You're able to analyze it together for epidemiology purposes, for disease surveillance purposes, for understanding and forecasting and things like that. So a lot of things can be done with the data once the data comes together. So in the US, the biggest challenge has been to bring data together in different formats, because each state has their own. It's a federated model, right? So every state has their own laws, and every healthcare organization used to keep the data in their own format. So the standard formats was not there. and it was only with HIPAA the standard formats were defined. But then, it was really enforced, or rather incentivized, I shouldn't say enforced, using the meaningful use. And to bring in meaningful use, all the regulatory changes were done. We talked about the HITECH Act and everything else. This is the meaningful use stage 1, 2, and 3. This was the crux of the change that was going to be brought in. Next slide. Yeah, so this is the incentive model. So if you see, if a physician office started in, or a hospital started implementing the Medicare, Medicaid early, then they would get more money incentives over a period of time, over stage 1, 2, and 3. But if they sort of came into it later, so then their incentivization would be lesser. Same thing with the physician offices. If they started early, they could sort of claim $44,000. But if they came in later, then they will be able to sort of claim much lesser. So there's a sliding scale from 2011 to 2014, just to show you that the incentivization was done using a financial incentive. In the US, and the financial incentive was in terms of tax incentives, so they could claim tax credits. So that's the model. So I just took a snapshot and put some information about. If you guys want to read it, you can read it, or later on also. So all this is available on the internet. Next slide. So yeah, so moving to the India case study. So in India, there's been a long journey. So if you look at before 2008, the National Rural Health Mission, each one, there were vertical programs, and each vertical program created their own IT system, which were all in silos. They were really not asked to create an IT system, but each one did on their own. And because they did on their own, there was really no thought process of interoperability. There was no thought process about bringing the data together. So each one was doing most of the work on paper, but then uploading the data at district level. So what happens is, the ANM and the ASHA workers, they write it in their diaries. They bring the data to the district every week or every 15 days, whatever that cycle. Every program had a different cycle of reporting. And at the district level, the data entry operator, under the sort of eye of the district health officer, would enter the data into the respective portal of the vertical program. And this continued from the even before 2008 it started, and it continued on. Even till today, you find the similar sort of model, that the data is coming from sort of, it gets electronic in form at the district level, and then it is collated at the directorate level in Delhi, and the decisions are made. Once the decisions are made, then they're conveyed back to the states and to the districts for implementation. So whatever they used to do in paper, they just superimposed IT on top of it without realizing that IT could make it real time. If you could use IT in a very perfect way. But nobody thought about it. So they used to work with paper. They used IT like paper. So it is, sometimes it's very, very hilarious that, somebody could not think beyond that. But then, we also should give them credit that they were the early movers. They were the ones who adopted IT well before, and they were asked to adopt IT. Even though, they may not have thought about standards and interoperability and things like that. So I was involved deeply with NHSRC in 2011, where we wrote the public health IT study report. In that, for the first time, we said that there needs to be interoperability, because if there is a baby born to a lady who had tuberculosis in the past, and the baby has low birth weight, you really have no way of tracing back whether the low birth weight was because of the tuberculosis that this woman had in the past, because all of these data points are in different systems and you just cannot trace it back. So we said you need to have a methodology, you need to have an interoperability, and for that standardization needs to happen. And Ministry of Health and Ministry of IT need to get together and write the standard. So that was a recommendation given in the Public Health IT Study Report in 2011. That was taken up by the government. And in 2013, two committees were created, EHR committee and the MDDS for Health committee. And both of them wrote their standards. So EHR standards were written, which basically told about what needs to be done and why it needs to be done in terms of interoperability, in terms of standardization of transactions, very similar to what HIPAA had said in the US. A lot of similar thinking was there, that transactions need to be standardized, the code set need to be standardized, and things like that. So, but then how are you going to standardize it? So where are the building blocks? What are the, Lego blocks that you're going to use, the data elements, the value sets, and all that? So that was in the metadata standards for health. So that was done in 2013-14. And then, all of this took about 5 years to get notified and everything. EHR standard got notified in 2013, then revised in 2016. The MDDS standard got notified in 2018. And by then, the government had made up their mind to, bring in the universal health coverage. So Ayushman Bharat got announced just after the MDDS for health was notified. And then, you will see that a lot of changes happened in 2019, 20, 21. Even this year, you're seeing a lot of policy changes happening to support the transformation. And why is this transformation happening? Because India is moving towards a universal health coverage. Ayushman Bharat is that universal health coverage, which has two components. One is the PMJ, Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, which is expected to sort of cover 40% of India's population. There is a primary healthcare component called the health and wellness centers in Ayushman Bharat. So that is a model that is emerging, and the change had to be brought in. To bring in this change, a lot of policy changes had to be done. So the National Digital Health Blueprint was written. So the National Digital Health Blueprint points to EHR standard and the MDDS standard for health for all the nuts and bolts, for all the building blocks and things like that, all the standards, transactions, code sets. So it says, look it up from there. And it gives you an architecture, a technical architecture that needs to be followed. So similarly, telemedicine guidelines were revised in April 2020 when the pandemic hit us. This year, what has happened is government has announced the UHI, the Unified Health Interface. So that is yet to be rolled out, but government is taking a lot of policy decisions to support the change. So that is coming. So you're seeing a financial lever here also. A financial lever is the Ayushman Bharat and related policy changes from a health insurance perspective. So health insurance coverage is expanding towards universal health coverage. So that's the financial lever. And we will talk a little bit about more as to how the digital health is being used as a financial lever. Next slide. Yeah, so this is, as I was saying, there is a consolidation happening in the health insurance sector, and we are moving towards a universal health coverage. So you will see that all the government health insurance schemes are being folded into the same platform. And, a lot of consolidation is happening there. The private health insurance was very small before Ayushman Bharat came in. And that was only 3% of India's population and things like that. But now with all this consolidation happening, we are likely to cross about 55% of India's population, which is a significant, chunk. And we should be able to sort of do a whole lot of things with this. When I say a whole lot of things, it becomes a very strong financial lever, because the government and the health insurance gets a control over the healthcare system. It becomes, when the insurance companies start asking for something, then the healthcare system will have to respond, because your money depends on it. So that is the time that is coming. Again, a financial lever is being used to bring in this change, and a lot of digital is going to be used as a backbone. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. Next slide. Yeah, this is the National Digital Health Blueprint, as I was talking about. It is an architecture document. It tells you about what is the architecture that needs to be used for different applications, digital health services. A lot of that is going to be covered in subsequent sessions, but I thought I will introduce that these are the policy purely from a governance perspective. This is a policy change that has happened. What are the details of it? There are subsequent sessions in which it is going to be covered. Next slide. This is the EHR standard. Again, details will be covered in subsequent session. This tells, in addition to the architecture told by NDHB, this talks about the what and the why. Next slide. Yeah, so the metadata standards for health gives you the how. This is the building block. So let's take an example. Now, if gender was to be taken, and you had male, female, transgender, other, and then in a South Indian language you had 1, 2, 3, 4, and in Hindi it was written as XYZ. Now, if you were to do interoperability between these systems, how do you know whether X is male or X is female, or 1 is female or 2 is transgender or 3 is transgender? You don't know. It is very hard to do the mapping, because each one have their own codes or code sets, so to say. So standardization of the code sets had to be done, and that is what MDDS did. So MDDS created data elements, which are basically placeholders for the values that come from the code directories, and it standardized all the code sets into code directories. Like for all the diagnosis, you use ICD-10. For all the procedures, you use SNOMED CT, or you have another option which comes from the health insurance side, and then you use LOINC for the labs, and the drug index is the National Formulary of India, or if India goes ahead and creates a full brand drug index at some point in time, so then that will have to be used. So right now the generic drug index is the National Formulary of India, so and so forth. So all this was laid out in the MDDS for health. Next slide. So we worked with the Niti Aayog to write a book called Health System for New India. Chapter 5 is a digital health chapter. I'm a co-author of this chapter, and in this one we wrote the concept of standardized transactions. So OPD standard transactions, IPD standard transactions, and the payer side standard transaction. Again, we are not saying anything different. We are not saying anything completely out of the box. And that is the reason I showed you the case study from the US. Many other countries have standardized their transactions. So in India, we also propose that the transactions need to be standardized, the formats need to be standardized, the code sets need to be standardized. And we took the global standards, we modified it for India so that it becomes machine readable. Now, what do you mean machine readable? Machine readable is when once IT system is sending this to another IT system without a human intervention, the receiving system should be able to understand. That is machine readable. So we said, the format should be machine readable. That is what US has done. That is what Canada has done. That is what UK has done. That is what all the countries who have gone through the digital transformation have done. We are not doing anything unique. We are not doing anything which hasn't been done before. So we are not reinventing the wheel. So, this is what was proposed, and it was widely accepted. A lot of provider sector, payer sector has come forward to adopt these standard transactions and take it forward. Next slide. So this is the e-object details. Again, it is going to be covered in a subsequent session, so I'm not going to talk into detail. In the center, you see all the standards that were proposed by MDDS, EHR, and NDHB have been taken into consideration. And then the e-objects have been built: the provider side e-object and the payer side e-object. So two different bundles of objects, so to say. Next slide. These are the levers of change. So in the levers of change, we are talking about the financial lever, which is the focus of our discussion today. So again, we are saying the financial lever is going to play a vital role. In about 2 minutes time, I'm going to tell you what that financial lever is going to be going forward. Right now, from a policy perspective, it is health insurance, consolidation of health insurance, moving towards universal health coverage. But how is digital going to play a role in that? We are going to talk about that in a little while. Then there is the second lever, which is the epidemiological lever. And we are seeing a whole lot happening in the pandemic, so I need not explain. Anyway, that is going to be taken up in another session subsequently. And then the third one is e-governance. Now, e-governance is also self-explanatory, and we are seeing a lot of e-governance issues happening in the pandemic. So we definitely want that going forward, all of these levers will play a role in adoption of the National Digital Health Blueprint and creation of the National Digital Health ecosystem, using all the standards that we have talked about. Next slide. Yeah, so the financial lever, we said the standardized transactions. So the standard transactions start from the provider side. So when a patient takes a consult, whether an outpatient consult or an inpatient consult, so the standardized e-object comes out. In this case, inpatient consult, so e-discharge and an e-bill comes out. They get bundled together to create the e-claim object, and then the e-claim object is sent for claim adjudication through the cloud. Next slide. Now, if the insurance sector starts asking for health insurance claim to be sent in a standard format, which is machine readable, and it is as per the standard code sets that we have talked about, then the game changes. So then the provider sector will have to provide, whether it's a medical college or a hospital or clinic or whoever, lab, radiology, whoever. So they'll have to provide the standard format, machine readable e-object will have to be provided because your money depends on it. And that is likely to happen soon. It is all the details have been worked out, and the rollout will happen. Next slide. So epidemiological lever, talked a little bit about the levers of change. And epidemiology lever, many of you are in community medicine, so you understand how important epidemiology is. So what we are saying is that if you don't get all the data in standard format from HIS, that is Hospital Information System, Electronic Medical Record System, labs, radiologies, and so on and so forth, if you don't get all of that together, and you don't sort of bundle it together in a standard format using the NDHB standards, then you won't be able to get the patient data that you require for all the data analysis. And that is what happened in this pandemic. When the pandemic hit us about a year and a half ago, the data just could not be brought together because all of these pieces were separate and they could not be brought together. And then then the government scrambled, and the private sector scrambled, and did a wonderful job of sort of getting the data together in Excel sheets and paper and whatever form they could, and they are able to collate the data and try to handle the pandemic. But it could have been far better. It could have been far more effective if the electronic data had been available in standard formats. And then based on the patient data, the clinical experience develops. You all know how epidemiology works. and then we could have identified the hotspots based on that data, based on that. So this could have been done near real time if we had the data, and data as in standard formats. But we didn't have it, so it is not possible near real time. There is a lot of delay in making this happen. And going forward, I think over time we are going to get better at it, and it's an inevitable change. We've learned the lesson, and it is going to happen. Next slide. So the disease burden has shifted. There are some examples that I'm putting here. So a lot of maternal and child health, communicable disease, injuries, they used to be the focus in the past. But the disease burden has shifted clearly from maternal and child health to NCDs, as it's called, non-communicable diseases. So obviously the policy has to shift. Now, only if you have the data, you'll be able to figure out that all this change is something that you can make, or this is a change that is really required. So for this to happen, you need the data coming in standard formats, as I was talking in the past. So all of you are from the community medicine background, so you pretty much understand what I'm talking about. Next slide. This is the disease burden. So if you look at the disease burden, just like in the US, I showed you, in India, we did some analysis, and the disease burden is galloping. So mental health, and COPD, asthma, diabetes, cardiovascular, all this is galloping, and then it's rising very rapidly. So we need to sort of do interventions there. To do the interventions, we need the data, and for not just data, but also a lot of analysis on the data has to be done. Epidemiology analysis has to be done, so that we can figure out how to intervene on that data. Gone is the time when you could wait for a paper analysis, or your Excel sheet analysis, which used to take a long time to happen. Now you need it near real time, and the interventions which are near real time, and digital is there to make it happen. So yeah, next slide. Data insight roadmap. So we are saying the current state is where that pointer is. So right now we are only able to bring some pieces of data together. We are able to do some analysis, which is descriptive in nature, but it is not diagnostic. It is not predictive. We really need to reach a point where it becomes forecasting. We are able to forecast that this is what is going to happen, and forecast well in advance, so that we are able to predict the spikes of diseases which are going to come, the nature of the disease that is going to come, and even be prescriptive that when this happens, be prepared with so and so drugs, so and so intervention, so and so so all your resources that needs to be moved, and all the resource optimization that needs to be done, all that can be done based on this data analysis. But then for data analysis, you have to bring all of this data together, and then but how do you bring the data together? So that is the reason I had to sort of tell you the story, that the financial lever is required to bring the data together. Why do you need the data? You need the data so that you can understand the disease better. Why do you need to understand the disease better? Because if you control the disease early, then the productivity of the people will be higher, and the cash outflow from health insurance will be lower. So it's a straightforward formula, and there is it's a no-brainer for a mathematician. Next slide. So e-governance will happen if all of the things that I have said, if they happen, then good e-governance will happen. The supply chain will happen. We'll be able to supply all the drugs and consumables and beds and everything wherever it is required. But we need the registries and the identifiers. So remember, I told you in HIPAA in the US, So same way in India, we need the registries and identifiers. Unless they are in place, we won't be able to do e-governance. And the supply chain is something that is lacking. We won't be able to sort of deliver it. Next slide. So I end with that. There is, next slide. There's a case study, sort of, a comparative study that we have done for various countries. So you can read this at leisure. We'll make it available. We put it as an appendix. Every country detail we have gone into. What was the insurance model? How did it work? What was the national ID? What was the federated structure? What was the UHID that was there? So we studied multiple countries, and all that research is available to you. You can study it. Whoever is interested in universal health coverage, this is wealth of information. Whoever is interested in governance, wealth of information. So welcome. Please use it. There is a lot of information that we are making available. Thank you so much. We will stop at that. Any questions or any thoughts you have, we will be happy to answer. I don't see anything in the questions. If there are no questions, then we'll wind up. Or please feel free to post your questions so that we can answer.
Thank you, Dr. Pankaj. Yeah, please put on any questions or any inputs. We'll make this content and the video available to you to later refer to the session, and you can always come back.
It looks like there are no questions coming. So do you want to give more time, or we wind up?
We can wind up, or we can send out a message to all with the link and the details, and they can post their questions in email to us so that we can address your questions before starting our next session. That will be on Thursday. Reach out to us, and happy to share all our knowledge or share the knowledge across. I think we can close the session, Dr. Pankaj. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Have a nice evening. Bye.